The Supreme Court lets Arkansas law penalize Israel boycotts stand. That's right. Turns out the Supreme Court actually doesn't give a fuck about the First Amendment, which we already knew. Freedom of expression is not a real thing. BDS is a perfectly legal way to boycott, demand sanctions be placed on an apartheid state such as Israel. Okay? BDS movements have worked in the past with apartheid South Africa. As a matter of fact, that was a component, that was a public component of the pressure placed upon the American government and placed so that they will place some legal pressure upon the apartheid South African government. Now, of course, that was a different time back then, okay? And it's a different time now. BDS, for those of you who still don't know what the fuck it is, even though I talk about it all the goddamn time, is boycott, divestments, and sanctions on the state of Israel, okay? It is a call to action, okay? Boycott, divest, okay? And put sanctions on the state of Israel to stop it from continuing its human right violations. Yes, but of course, in many of these wonderful free speech loving states, as I regularly talk about, okay, I talk about this all the fucking time. This is the number one clear-cut violation of First Amendment rules, okay? This is it. There's no better representation of this. And to add insult to injury, the more ironic part of this is that the BDS laws that were put in place in these red states, where they actually are supposedly all about free speech, okay? Definitely not. They were put in place by AIPAC. They were advocated for and written by AIPAC, which is a, lobbying group for Israel, a foreign nation. So, like, in the United States of America, all these states that love talking about how much they love preserving the sanctity of the First Amendment. As a matter of fact, I got my Second Amendment so I can protect the First, Yee, brother. I should be able to say the N-word whenever I want without any scrutiny whatsoever. Hasan, you can't say this shit, bro. Anti-Semitic. I'm sorry, what? Oh, you're just memeing. Okay, I thought you legitimately were about to say it's anti-Semitic to state that AIPAC, a lobby that works at the behest of a foreign nation, Israel, was the correct, completely correctly pointing out that they were responsible for the crafting of anti-BDS legislation. Anyway, so, I mean, that's not really a meme. People do say that if you say that law. I know, but I would not have expected it to be here, of all places. Okay? Anyway, now what is wonderful about this process is that, like, even Dianne Feinstein and Bernie Sanders have correctly called out, like, that this kind of legislation is completely against the First Amendment. It is a clear-cut violation, and yet it usually falls on deaf ears. And now there will be very little coverage of it. And now they've moved beyond that and have actually solidified it. The U.S. Supreme Court has let stand an Arkansas law penalizing boycotts of Israel that has provided the model for a proliferation of similar legislation to protect oil companies, gun makers, and other contentious industries from political protest movements. The Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal from the editor of Arkansas Times, Alan Leverett, after a federal court upheld a law requiring him to sign a commitment not to boycott Israel in order to receive advertising contracts from the state. This is real. In some of these states, okay, like Texas, for example, if you want to work for the public school, you have to sign a law that says you will never participate in BDS. You will never participate in boycotting or demanding sanctions to be placed upon the state of Israel. Many of you still don't know this, even though I talk about it all the fucking time. Literally, 35 states in the United States of America, if I'm not mistaken, 35, have laws like this. Now, the American Civil Liberties Union asked the Supreme Court to overturn the Arkansas law on the grounds that it is in conflict with the court's own ruling 40 years ago that popular boycotts have a long tradition in American history and are protected speech under the First Amendment. It is. It is protected speech. It's supposed to be. Not according to the Supreme Court, however. The law is one of more than 30 passed by states in recent years, backed by both Republicans and Democrats, that require individuals or companies to pledge not to boycott Israel or its settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories in order to do business with the state. How fire is that? Woo! Goddamn. The law is pushed by groups such as American Israel Public Affairs Committee, also known as AIPAC, and the American Jewish Committee, with the backing of the Israeli government, are primarily aimed at Palestinian boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. But they have also provided the template for legislation to curb boycotts of companies over the climate crisis, gun control, factory farming, and other issues. Leverett said he had no intention of boycotting Israel, with which his newspaper does no business, but he refused to sign the commitment because it requires the Arkansas Times to take a political position on in return for advertising. The editor said he was disappointed that the Supreme Court declined to take the case, but it will not change its position. We are not going to sign any political pledges in return for advertising. The Supreme Court can ignore our First Amendment rights, but we'll continue to exercise them vigorously. Although a federal court upheld the Arkansas legislation, courts in other jurisdictions have ruled against similar laws and forced some states to weaken their provisions. Now, I believe someone in the chat mentioned Arizona. Arizona is one state where the Supreme Court of Arizona actually decided against the BDS decision, and yet the state still follows through with it regardless. Despite the fact that the Arizona Supreme Court itself actually said this is unconstitutional, Arizona state itself is still like, no, you must pledge allegiance to the state of Israel and all of its settlements in all of its glory if you want to get money from the government. We don't give a fuck. It's crazy. It's crazy. Kansas revisited its law in 2018 in the face of a lawsuit by a Wichita teacher who was told to sign a pledge not to boycott Israel in order to keep her job. Texas narrowed its law to exclude individuals and to apply only to larger companies after a school speech pathologist sued when she lost her contract for refusing to sign a similar commitment. The ACLU and other groups also won judgments in Arizona and Georgia that anti-boycott laws intruded on free speech laws. Leverett warned that letting the Arkansas law stand will lead to further suppression of legitimate political protests against corporate interests. This simply is a template. It doesn't stop here. We now have in Arkansas legislature bills introduced to deny state contracts to financial and banking institutions that have ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance policies that prohibit them from investing in fossil fuels or firearm companies. In other states, they've introduced laws that deny state contracts to any company that subsidizes their employees' transportation costs if they go out of state for an abortion. That's awesome. If you want money, if you want subsidies from the state, you have to fucking sign a piece of paper that says you promise never to say meanie bobini things about the state of Israel. Abby Martin wasn't allowed to speak at Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia, because she wouldn't sign their anti-BDS pledge. Yeah. Remember, we always talk about the college campus circuit, okay? Freedom of speech is supposed to be constitutionally protected, which means you can't have government interference. You can't be penalized by the government. You can't be stopped by the government. You can't be thrown in jail by the government for pretty much every type of speech, right? Many people misconstrue that and they talk about how, it's actually, freedom of speech should apply to private corporations. In many instances, it doesn't. This is not even a private corporation thing. This is literally public, okay? So when a private university decides, hey, you're transphobic, hey, you're doxing our fucking students, putting their lives in danger, we don't want you to come to our school, all hell breaks loose. But when Abby Martin is not allowed to go to a public state school in Georgia because she won't sign a fucking anti-BDS pledge, okay? That's not ever talked about. And that is by design. Because these fucking right-wing shitheads don't give a fuck. Because they will utilize the law like this. They will make anti-free speech provisions in a nation where they claim they care so much about free speech. Several states have passed the Energy Discrimination Elimination Act to shield big oil from share sell-offs and other measures to protest against fossil fuel industry's role in the climate crisis. They literally are punishing, okay? They are punishing. This is an ALEC initiative, by the way. ALEC. Oh, my God. The American Legislative Exchange Council. Demons. Like actual fucking demons. The demons are not like vampires and devils. They wear suits and they sit on the board of the American Legislative Exchange Council. These are the real demons in society, okay? Energy Discrimination Elimination Act. You fucking pull funds and you divest from, fossil fuel industries because they're destroying the planet. You are no longer eligible for state subsidies. How the fuck does this go through? How? All of these states are literally making it legal to fucking discriminate against trans people. Florida is pushing for a fucking bill that says, like, if you correctly call out someone who's being bigoted to you, then you are eligible to pay $35,000 in fines to the person, and it constitutes defamation as long as they say, hey, it's my religious freedom that gives me the freedom and the liberty to call you the T word, the T slur. You know what I mean? It was introduced, not passed. Sorry. I mean, regardless, though. Meanwhile, simultaneously, they're rolling back free speech protections for people who want to say, hey, I don't want to actually invest in fossil fuel companies. Well, can't get government contracts any longer then. Fuck yourself. How dare you? How dare you pull funds away from our big, beautiful oil companies? That's a slur. Other legislation is designed to prevent banks from denying financing to creditworthy companies solely for the purpose of marketing their environmental or social justice credentials. The ACLU's chief litigator in this case, Brian Haas, described the Supreme Court's decision not to take up a case as a missed opportunity to clarify the law. From the Boston Tea Party to the Montgomery bus boycott to the boycott of South Africa, apartheid South Africa, Americans have proudly exercised that right to make their voices heard. But if states can suppress boycotts of Israel, then they can suppress boycotts of the National Rifle Association or Planned Parenthood. But one reason it may not get passed is because people don't want to waste time with the unconstitutional shit, but when the court refuses to enforce the Constitution, that opens the path for people to bring the shit back. Exactly. When people talk about the creeping burn of fascism, okay, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens exactly like this. They slowly but surely tick away and undermine the civil liberties of the most marginalized, slowly but surely just kind of ramping up the intensity. It starts off with Palestinian rights. Nobody in America gives a fuck about Palestinian rights. You know what I mean? No one. Not even a thing that people think about, right? Shouts out to the evangelicals for also, on top of that, doing offering the most support to the state of Israel. Okay. Most liberals don't even fucking consider Palestinians to be human beings. So you go after Palestinians first, then you go after environmental activists, then you go after, you just slowly open it up a little bit. Ultimately getting to a point where it's like, yeah, if you say that a right-wing company is led by a bigot, that's a slur, and that's the only hate crime that should be prosecuted. Yes, that's how I started talking about this. The Reverse Woke Act is why I started talking about how the Supreme Court does not give a fuck about the First Amendment. So there you go. There you have it, folks. Abhorrent. Just fundamentally broken. Absolutely insane.